there's a new FAFSA form. This was because of changes made back in, I believe, 2019, 2020, under the former administration, to make it easier. It was supposed to be easier. Now, apparently it rolled out on Sunday, what they call a soft launch. And what do they say about soft launches? You do soft launches to see where the problems are. And boy, were there a bunch of problems. According to the Washington Post, let's see, the FAFSA was available for a 30-minute window on Sunday, 2 hours on Monday, during which time more than 30,000 applications were successfully submitted. Submissions climbed to 150,000 on Tuesday when it opened the website for 6 hours, or the form, and then another 250,000 applications. 250,000 applications were in the process of being completed. So obviously, there are a lot of people that are looking for financial aid. And at a time when we are constantly talking about student loan debt and not kind of getting underwater with your education because, whether it's wages or housing or whatever, once you leave college, things don't all of a sudden become cheaper, right? That degree is not a paycheck. And so you have to figure out a way to pay for your college education in a way in which it doesn't leave you underwater when you graduate.
I remember when we were at KGO, we had the woman that runs the FAFSA, that at the time, the director of the department that oversees it, on the Pat Thurston show. And she was saying, even if you feel like you don't need help with college,
anyway, yeah.
everyone should apply. Everyone should fill it out to see where you are, what happens, what you're offered. And so it doesn't matter. Everyone should fill it out, right?
Yeah,
that is going to college in the fall.
It's called free application for federal student aid. So, I mean, of all the applications you have to pay money for, go for the free one. It's no harm, no foul. But there's a lot of questions surrounding it, especially because not every state, I believe, does it the exact same way. Some say it's a first come, first serve, which is the worst, in my mind, thing to say to anybody. First come, first serve means there's just going to be this rush to get in the website. It's going to be overloaded. And so what are the best ways of handling this? Because it's stressful when you need financial help.
That's right.
Well, Mark Kantrowitz is a financial aid expert. He has also authored a number of books, 2 books. I'm going to show you them. One is called Who Graduates from College and Who Doesn't, and How to Appeal for More College Financial Aid. And Mark is so generous to come on the Nikki Medoro Show. Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you heard the introduction there. First off, I mean, so I before I brought you on the show, I was telling my viewers that you actually were involved in putting the FAFSA online back in 1996, the year I graduated high school. That, I'm sure many of my friends were, I'm assuming, just filling out the paper and pen form. Was it as much of a cluster back then as it appeared to be with the soft launch on Sunday?
No, in part, back then we were just putting the form online. We weren't changing the processing infrastructure. So there was an existing, what's called CPS. It's now called FPS for processing the forms. And all we were doing is providing the data into that, not re-engineering it. This time, as part of FAFSA simplification, they're not just simplifying the form, which involves deleting questions. They're also changing that underlying infrastructure, rebuilding it from scratch, because it's decades old. And that's partly where the problems have arisen, and partly, this is essentially a brand new form.
Right. Okay, so have you checked out the new form?
I was able to submit it yesterday for the first time, despite reloading the website every half hour or so from when it supposedly was supposed to be available on Friday until the present. But I was able to get through the form. There were only relatively minor glitches. And the 2 glitches I encountered, one, the contributor never received the email. But that may be a glitch in there asking for the contributor's email address, because I listed married filing jointly. There shouldn't have been a request for a contributor. And the other was in the list of schools, when I specified the city and state in which the college exists, it was in kind of random order, not alphabetical order, not in order of federal school code. So some schools have multiple federal school codes, like one for undergrad and the other for grad. And
Mhm.
if you see the name of your school and it happens to be the graduate school version, you might still select it even if you're looking for the undergrad. So that's whereas if it's sorted alphabetically, you're going to see them all at once.
Right. And
So,
you'd
so
see
that's a
probably those two next to each other and know that you want to go to the undergrad versus the graduate school.
right, or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Okay, so as far as the questions that are on it versus the ones that were removed from, the original form, why were these changes made? What kind of questions were deemed unnecessary, I guess?
Well, part of the reason for FAFSA simplification is the complexity of the form, which is more complicated than your federal income tax return.
Oh,
What
fabulous.
it was seen as a barrier to college access that you had to have a PhD in finance to complete the form. So the new form gets rid of about 2/3 of the questions.
Oh,
And
wow.
maybe a few more, maybe a few less. A lot depends on the details. Like if you're an independent student, then parent information isn't required. They got rid of most questions that affected only about 1% of applicants. So why make everybody answer a question that most people won't need to answer? And they had greater alignment with the federal income tax return so that more of these questions could be answered by transferring data from the IRS into the form.
That's a good
And that
idea.
transferring data is now automatic, and you have to agree to it if you want to complete the form. If you don't agree to it, then you're not getting federal student financial aid.
Well, I was going to ask you because you mentioned an independent student not needing, the information regarding parents. And this is again, I'm speaking as someone who my oldest child is a freshman in high school, so I'm a couple years away from even considering this. But it would make sense to me that a student who wants financial aid would not want to be on their parents because obviously that you would assume that they would have a higher income. If I have a very low income, then I might be able to qualify better. Is that true?
Well, you're substituting, if you're an independent student, the finances of a spouse possibly for finances of a parent. So sometimes it leads to more financial aid, sometimes less. But you can't simply declare yourself independent. If you're under age 24, single, you have no dependents other than a spouse, you aren't an orphan, you aren't a veteran or serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, you're most likely going to be a dependent student. It's only
Mm.
if you answer yes to one of these personal circumstances questions, which are the dependency status questions, that you will be considered an independent student and parents' information is not required. Now, there is an ability of a college financial aid administrator to perform a dependency override to change you from dependent to independent in extreme circumstances, like court protection from abuse orders against the parents,
Mm.
both parents incarcerated or institutionalized,
No.
um, and anything that really reflects a dissolution of that family. Uh, and that's incredibly rare. Less than 1% of applicants qualify for a dependency override. But the ones who do, there is a change this year. Instead of requiring you to ask for a dependency override every single year, you can ask for it the first year, and then it's assumed to continue unless there's conflicting information in that subsequent year. So that simplifies things a lot for many students.
So you can't just say my parents aren't helping me pay for college.
That's what I was just going to
I'm
ask.
completely
Yeah.
on my own here.
They don't
Everybody's
want me to go to
fine.
college. Yeah.
No one's in jail, but I'm on my own financially wise. You can't say
No,
that.
you can't say that.
No.
And even if your parents are out of the country or not U.S. citizens or unwilling to complete the form or unwilling to and pay for college,
Right.
you're still considered a dependent student. Now, there is an option for you to complete the form without parental information, but then the most you'll be eligible for is unsubsidized federal Stafford loans. And that's just loans. It's not the grants. It's not other financial aid. And that's very difficult for a student to be able to afford to pay for college without that.
How much money? I mean, what is the range of money that you would get in financial aid? Between what a small stipend to full ride? Is that what you're applying for with this?
Well, You are, and it's a collection of financial aid from multiple sources.
Okay.
So there's the federal Pell Grant, which is about $7,400. There's the federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, which can be up to $4,000, but in most cases a lot less.
Is that per
There's
month or per year?
per year.
Okay.
And then there's federal student loans, which start off for a dependent student at up to $5,500 as a freshman, all the way up to $7,500 as a senior. Independent students get $9,500 to $12,500. There's state grants, which vary by state. Some states are very generous, like the Cal Grant in California, and the in New York has the TAP Grant. There are also money from the colleges themselves called institutional financial aid. And that's where a significant part of the money comes from. And each college has different levels of generosity. Now, some of them are more expensive and give more grants, but what you need to focus on is the net price. That's the total cost of attendance, tuition fees, housing, food, transportation, book supplies and equipment, and the other expenses, minus the gift aid, the grants and scholarships, and other money that doesn't need to be repaid. That's your net price. And so you could have a high cost college that has high grants, but the net price is still greater than the cost of attendance at an in-state public college. So you have to do a comparison of each college based on their financial aid offers. Now, the colleges do have net price calculators that you can use to get an estimate in advance, but the net price is the way to compare colleges on an apples to apples basis.
Are there any things that hurt you in the financial aid process? And the first thing that pops into my mind is, like, I'm saving for my kids' college through a 529 plan. Is that hurting them? Does that disqualify them? I've heard rumors that you shouldn't do that because then that disqualifies your child for financial aid.
Well, it doesn't disqualify you. It reduces the amount of financial aid by a small amount. If it's owned by the student, a custodial 529 plan account, or the parent, it is reported as a parent asset on the FAFSA. Now, new this year, 529 plans owned by for siblings, where the parent's the owner and the siblings the beneficiary, aren't reported. It's only for the student. So that has a big impact. And reporting it as a parent asset, parent assets are assessed on a bracketed scale with a top bracket of 5.64%. So if you've got $10,000 in a 529 plan, that's going to reduce aid eligibility by up to $564, which still leaves you with $9,436 to pay for college costs. So you still come out ahead. Now, new this year is a change for 529 plans that are owned by anybody other than the student or parent. So a grandparent, aunt, or uncle. It used to be the case that these aren't reported as assets on the FAFSA, but distributions counted as untaxed income to the beneficiary, and that reduced aid eligibility by as much as half of that distribution amount.
Oh, wow.
That was a big negative impact. Well, this year, the question in which untaxed income to the beneficiary would have been reported, the cash support question, has been eliminated. So a grandparent-owned 529 plan will no longer have any impact on eligibility for need-based financial aid. So that's a big improvement.
Can you transfer? Can you transfer your 529 into a grandparent's name then?
Possibly. It depends on the state. There's two different methods. One would be to change the account owner. In many states, you can only change the account owner in the event of death or disability or some other drastic situation like that. In some states, you even have a successor account owner listed when you create the 529 plan. The other method would be for the grandparent to open a 529 plan with themselves as the account owner, and then you do a rollover from the parent-owned 529 plan to the grandparent-owned 529 plan.
Yep.
The main issue with that is if it's in a different state, many states consider an outbound, out-of-state rollover to be a non-qualified distribution. That would then be taxable at the earnings portion of that would be taxable at the state income tax rate of the parent.
Right.
And there would be recapture of any state income tax breaks that have been previously received corresponding to the amount of that rollover. So if you're going to do this, you have to have the 529 plan for the grandparent in the same state as the 529 plan for the parent.
I see. I see. Now, when we're talking about, financial aid, I'm seeing, I think it was Lady Beatrice, one of our viewers, was talking about the fact that you need to be a full-time student versus a part-time student. Is that true?
Right. So some types of financial aid are prorated based on enrollment status. The federal Pell Grant, if you're enrolled half-time, you're getting half of the Pell Grant that you would otherwise receive. Student loans, you have to be enrolled at least half-time.
Mm.
If you're enrolled less than half-time, you don't get the federal student loans. So it depends on the type of aid. Now, if you're going to be enrolled, say, quarter-time, you can opt out of the federal Pell Grant if you know that next year you're going to be enrolled full-time to preserve your eligibility for it.
Ah.
The Pell Grant has a limit of the equivalent of 6 years of Pell Grant eligibility. So in some cases, you might want to opt out of a small Pell Grant to preserve eligibility for a larger one.
Now, again, if you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Mark Kantrowitz, and he's written several books. One is How to Appeal for More College Financial Aid. Um, I read that title, and I take that to mean I get a response regarding financial aid, and I don't like it. I need more money. I want more money. So, what are some of the tips that you give parents that I'm sure call you all the time and say, I can't afford it. My kid can't afford it. I need more financial aid for them. And they don't want to take out student loans because I subscribe to the belief that you should, either pay for college or get a
Mhm.
scholarship or a grant because student loans will get you in the end.
Right. So a successful appeal for more financial aid, is based on special circumstances. And special circumstances are differences. Anything that changed from the base year upon which the income is based, which is the second prior year, the
Mhm.
prior year. Also, anything that differentiates your family from the typical family. So, as examples of the first, we could have a change in income, job loss, pay cuts. And you had a bonus then, and you don't have that bonus now. And the 2-year-old income information. So for the 2024-25 FAFSA, that's 2022 income, is not reflective of your ability to pay now.
Okay.
It can also be things like high unreimbursed medical or dental expenses, or high dependent care costs for a special needs child or elderly parent.
Mhm.
Um, your house was destroyed in a tornado, or an earthquake. And even though your primary home, your family home, is not counted as an asset on the FAFSA, it's nevertheless an appealable item, because when your home's destroyed by a fire, you lose all the stuff inside as well,
Mhm.
and that can often increase your costs. And so, even though they can't make an adjustment to an asset that isn't reported, they can probably give you the benefit of the doubt on other items. So the most common appealable item is a change in income, and that's also the most likely to be approved. The process is you write a letter to the college financial aid office. It should be a short letter where you detail the special circumstances, one bullet per item, where you're specific as to what happened, on what dates, and the financial impact. Um, and usually you'll have more than one, because when it rains, it pours. Um, and then you include copies, not originals, of documentation to support your appeal. So if you've been laid off from your job, a copy of the job layoff notice, or proof that you received unemployment benefits within the last 90 days. You send this to the financial aid office. You call them after they would have received it, just to confirm that they received it and to ask if they have any further questions. And most colleges will respond pretty quickly. Sometimes it's just the financial aid administrator who makes the decisions. Sometimes it is a committee. But if they think that your appeal merits an adjustment, that adjustment will be related to the financial impact of that special circumstance. So if you've had a change in income, they will make changes to the data on your FAFSA reflecting that reduction in income. and that will yield a new student aid index, which will yield a new financial aid package. So it's not that they think, oh, and you had this unfortunate circumstance, we pity you, we're going to give you a few $1,000s more.
Right.
No, it's all after they decide that it merits an adjustment. At that point, it becomes formulaic.
Right. There's a calculation involved in doing that. We have another question. What if you're only getting half your Pell Grant and you're in danger of running out of out of pocket money? What should that student do without risk of financial aid debt later?
Well, it depends on the reasons why you're running out of money. If you had on uh, unanticipated expense, many colleges have emergency financial aid. So your car broke down and you're having trouble getting to school because you're a commuter student, you talk to the financial aid office and they will sometimes they will provide you with money. It might be a loan though, but sometimes it's a grant to help you repair that car, or you need money to get bailed out of jail because you partied too heavily. Or another common thing is, if you're food insecure, you don't have enough money to buy food. Many college campuses have food pantries. Um, ice for transportation. Some of them will have in the financial aid office a fishbowl with local transit cards, so that you can take the bus for free. Some even build it into your student ID, and you may not be aware of that they do a deal with the local public transportation to provide free transportation for all students. So there often are options. And also talk to the financial aid office, explain what's going on. Maybe your textbooks cost more than you anticipated, more than the allowance that's built into the financial aid formula. In that case, show them the receipts, and they may adjust the book, supplies, and equipment allowance that's in the financial aid formula to accommodate your actual costs, and then you'll get more financial aid. Now, that additional financial aid may be grants, but it also may be in the form of loans.
Yeah. Another question from Lynn. If a student takes more than 4 years to finish their BS or BA degree, does he or she still get financial aid? Can they still get financial aid?
Generally, yes. There is something called the maximum time frame restriction, which is if you are not going to complete your degree within 150% of the normal time frame, which is 6 years for a 4-year degree,
That's what I was
you'll
thinking.
lose aid eligibility. And also, the Pell Grant is limited to 6 years worth of financial aid. So after that, in 4 years, you still have 2 years left. Now, with the student loans, there are annual and aggregate limits. I mentioned the annual limits before, 5,500 to 7,500 for a dependent student. There's an aggregate limit of 31,000. Now, if you sum up the annual limits, they total 27,000. So you get some borrowing capability during that 5th year if you even if you've maxed out the annual limits before then.
Oh, I see.
And you might not have ability for a 6th year, but the Parent Plus loan is also available after for your parents to borrow, and that doesn't have any annual or aggregate limit other than the total cost of attendance minus other aid.
And that's a loan, the parent one.
That's a loan.
Yeah.
And loans have to be repaid.
Exactly.
Interest.
I feel like people are looking for the free money, Mark. That's what I'm sensing that people want to do this as cheaply as possible, which means less out of pocket. Now, I am a huge proponent, Mark, of community college first. Here in California, many of our community colleges for the first 2 years are free. So for me, that's a no-brainer. Does going to community college first impact the grants, scholarships, loans that you can get when you go to a 4-year?
Well, it does have an impact. Now, the maximum time frame restriction is based on the degree level. So if you took 2 or 3 years for your associate's degree, you still have up to that 6 years for the bachelor's degree. And those first 2 years or 3 years do count against it, but you increase the time frame before you lose aid eligibility. Now, I generally don't recommend taking a detour through a community college. Community colleges are great if that's your goal, is to get an associate's degree or certificate. But if you're looking to get a bachelor's degree ultimately, you may miss your destination if you take a detour through that community college. Students who start off at a community college intending to obtain a bachelor's degree succeed in doing so within 6 years, only about 20% of the time. Now,
Really?
now, at colleges that have what are called strong articulation agreements,
Hmm.
where if you get
Yeah.
that associate's degree, you're entitled to transfer to a four-year public college in the state. Those it increases about 30%.
I
Whereas
would have thought it
students,
would be much higher if you had your own separate track.
no, and the problems that kind of forced you into a community college path, like money, those persist even after you get that associate's degree. And that's despite the BOG fee waiver, or now it's the California Promise Grant, is what it's called. Even though that makes the tuition free for 2 years at that community college. Um, so that compares to two-thirds of students who start off at a four-year institution getting that bachelor's degree within 6 years.
Mm.
So it's a trade-off. Now, individual circumstances vary. So maybe in your case, you know that you're going to complete that four-year degree.
Mhm.
But if you're doing this solely to save money, it may not be as successful, in part because some of those classes that you took in the community college may not transfer, or that you may get general credit for them, but not serve as a prerequisite for the similar class at the four-year degree. So you might have to retake those classes.
Hmm.
And that means it takes longer to, I mean, ultimately achieve that four-year degree, and longer means more expensive.
Do you think the number of grants or scholarships or whatever that a college offers students is responsible for the rising college tuition? What is the relationship there? Is it better to not offer these things, and that would possibly bring down the average cost of going to a college?
Well, need-based financial aid makes college more affordable despite the increases in college costs. College costs go up faster than the need-based financial aid. So it's not that financial aid causes increases in college costs. The main exception would be at for-profit colleges, where there's something called the 90-10 rule that in effect forces the colleges to increase their costs whenever financial aid increases. But at traditional public and private nonprofit colleges, there is no significant impact.
So the federal government is kind of getting into the student loan business when we were talking about the student loan debt, kind of offering these things. Is there a relationship between that and the cost of college?
Well, during 4 years of the Bush administration, the loan limits didn't, I mean, the Pell Grant didn't increase, yet college costs went up. From 2008 to the present, annual and aggregate loan limits didn't increase, yet college costs continue to increase. And nobody in their right mind thinks that a $7,000 Pell Grant or a $5,000 student loan causes a college to charge $70,000-$80,000 a year. The
What does
problem,
make a college charge that much money, Mark? Because that's my question.
well, government support of post-secondary education has not kept pace with increases in college costs. And I mean, colleges have a mix of expenses, uh, faculty and staff salaries and benefits, facility costs, equipment costs, and energy costs, all of which go up faster than inflation. Now, we have to distinguish between the sticker price and the net price.
Mm.
The sticker price isn't what most people pay, it's the net price is what people pay. And the sticker price is going to go up by a factor of two in some cases relative to the gift aid that the college gives out. But it's the net price that really matters from the student perspective. And so you do have a multiplier effect from the awarding of financial aid. So for every dollar of um, gross tuition, the college may be netting only 50 cents on that dollar.
Mm.
So that means that they have to increase the sticker price at twice the rate of the increase in the revenue to the college. And it's a little bit complicated to understand, but that's basically one of the key drivers of increases in the sticker price, as opposed to increases in the net price.
Go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to ask you, is there a limit at which you shouldn't even bother filling out the FAFSA? As in California, middle class is a lot different than middle class in the middle of the country.
Good point.
So we may be making, I don't know, pick a number. If a family in the Bay Area, say San Francisco Bay Area, makes $300,000 a year, which is kind of, I would say,
Seems like a lot of money.
It seems like a lot of money, but then
Doesn't go very far.
It might not be compared to other parts of the country. Is there a limit at which you should just not even bother applying for financial aid?
Well, one needs to consider that wealthier students tend to apply to more expensive colleges.
Right.
And financial aid is based on financial need, which is the difference between the college cost of attendance and ability to pay as measured on the FAFSA or some other financial aid form. So there are two ways to have greater financial need. One is to have a lower student aid index, the ability to pay. The other is to have a higher cost of attendance. So if you're enrolling at a college that charges $80,000 a year, you're going to have greater financial need than if you enroll at an in-state public college that may charge $30,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that still makes it worthwhile for many middle income and even some high income families to apply for financial aid. Also, filing the FAFSA is a prerequisite for receiving federal student loans. And some people believe that you need to have skin in the game to appreciate your education. I don't necessarily agree that you need to experience pain to enjoy something.
I agree.
And it's their future, so they know what's at stake. But some families do think that you need to have some skin in the game, and student loans are a reasonable way of doing that, and federal student loans.
Right.
Because even if you borrow to the limit for the federal student loans, you're not going to be borrowing excessively. Your goal should be to have total student loan debt at graduation that is less than your annual starting salary.
Right.
If total debt is less than annual income, you should be able to afford to repay your student loans in 10 years or less, which is a reasonable amount of time. Now, nobody likes loans, but it's very few people are able to graduate college with no loans.
Mm-hmm.
The key is to minimize your debt as opposed to eliminating it entirely.
If you manage to get a merit-based scholarship from someone or some organization, does that cut down on the amount of money you're eligible through FAFSA?
Well, it doesn't affect the money that you get from the FAFSA, but the money you get from the college may be reduced. It's called scholarship displacement.
Right.
Now, the good news in California is that California just passed a law that bans scholarship displacement for Pell Grant recipients.
Oh.
So if you're a Pell Grant recipient and you receive other scholarships and grants, the college cannot reduce its financial aid offer to, and you just want $1,000 scholarship, they reduce it by $1,000. They can no longer do that unless your total grants that you're receiving exceeds the cost of attendance, which is incredibly rare.
Right.
Now, in other states, there is still scholarship displacement. A total of 6 states have so far banned scholarship displacement, which leaves quite a few states that still do that practice. Now, sometimes if you're faced with that, there are ways around it. And first, talk to the scholarship granting organization, because sometimes they have pull with the colleges that will get them to not displace the money, or maybe they can defer your scholarship to grad school or to a summer program or something like that, so you benefit without having it fully eliminated. There are lots of options, but scholarship displacement happens, unfortunately, about half of scholarship recipients experience scholarship displacement, according to one survey.
Is there a state that does better regarding getting scholarships and getting grants than others? And why would that be?
Well, let's distinguish between money from the colleges and money from private sources. So money from private sources, if you want to apply for private scholarships, there are several large databases out there that are free. That's a key thing, where you submit your information and it matches you against that database of scholarships. showing you every scholarship for which you're eligible, and then it's up to you to apply for them. And the typical high school senior will match about 100 of these scholarships. Some are small, some are huge. Those databases include fastweb.com and the College Board's Big Future. And I can send you links to them.
Please do. I'll
afterward.
include them in the show notes, guys, so that we have them.
Yeah. Just making a note to do that.
Thank you.
So now about 1 in 7 students wins private scholarships that they use to pay for college. And the average amount is almost $5,000 now. The data just got updated. So it's part of your plan for paying for college, but for most people, it's not the entire plan. There are a handful of scholarships that pay for a completely free ride. Like if you win the top prize in the Regeneron Science Talent Search, that's a $250,000 scholarship.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yes, that will cover almost all of it. There's also, I think, a Coolidge scholarship that provides a free ride. There are, I'd say, probably about a dozen where the top prize is $100,000 or more. But for the average amount that people receive is much, much lower.
Right. About $5,000. I mean,
But
you were
that's-
talking. Go ahead.
But that's money you don't have to borrow. So every dollar you win and every dollar you save is a dollar less you're going to have to borrow.
Is it easier to get, and I don't know if this is, that's why I'm asking, is it easier to get scholarships, financial aid in state or out of state, or does that not matter at all?
Well, for the money from the college itself, in state is easier.
Okay.
Because there are these, and the grants, the state grants are often restricted to public colleges in the state. I mean, there are a few exceptions, like the Chaffee grant for people who are foster youth, but for most, the typical state grant, it's only for state institutions. And the priorities of the colleges may be different with regard to in-state versus out-of-state students. They may have a mandate to be more generous to in-state students. And they may see out-of-state students as a cash cow,
Right.
revenue center, as they often call it. And especially international students, there usually is very little financial aid for international students.
Is, with scholarships, it seems, or even just college admissions, you kind of want to put on your best face. I have the best grades, I have extracurriculars, things like that. Does any of that matter in regards to grants and things like that? Things that kids could do now in high school to kind of better prepare, or is it just filling out the application and hoping you get chosen?
Well, for the institutional money, some colleges have what are called merit scholarships or academic scholarships. Which in some cases are based on your grades and your test scores and your class rank. So getting better grades can help you receive more institutional merit money. And with regard to the private scholarships, and although many of them ask for information about your high school GPA, less than 10% of them are contingent on it, and you win based on having perfect SAT test scores or anything like that, like the National Merit Scholarships. But on the other hand, even though they don't ask for your test scores or your GPA, students who do better in high school tend to do better in the scholarship game.
Okay.
And students who take more math tend to win more scholarships and to be more likely to graduate. And it's a continuum. So if you've taken Algebra 2, you're more likely to graduate than someone who's taken maxes out at Algebra 1. If you've taken pre-calculus or calculus, you're more likely to graduate than someone with just Algebra 2. So math matters.
Well, I never knew that statistic. That's interesting. Because you do write that book that I had mentioned before, but let me throw it up there again. And that is who goes to college and who doesn't. So there it is right there. Again, my guest, Mark Kantrowitz. Who goes to college? Who graduates college and who doesn't, Mark?
Well,
to give your book a one-line sentence, I guess. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Expectations matter. So if your parents and teachers believe you're going to go to college, you're more likely to go to college. If your parents have themselves gone to college, and you're more likely to go. And if they've gotten more advanced degrees, you're even more likely to go and graduate from college. Um, but also, if you do better in high school, as I mentioned, a better GPA means you're more likely to graduate. College isn't for everyone, but for many people, it is the most certain path to financial success after graduation.
But it's so expensive. I think a lot of people are having, this realization, because after college, you have to get a job. The job market can be very competitive. Sometimes you're going to college for one thing, and when you graduate college, that whole entire job field has changed. I mean, with the advent of AI and what it's, doing to the job market and what jobs are going to be out there, it can be scary to choose a major, let alone feel like there's going to be a job around for you to get to pay back the student loans that you need to go to college. So if somebody came to you today in 2024, Mark, and said, "Is it worth it?" and kind of what fields am I safest that there would be a job for me to be able to pay back? I mean, what would you say?
Well, it is still college is still worthwhile, but you have to be careful. And you don't need to go to the most expensive college on the planet. An in-state public college will cost you about a quarter to a third of the cost of a private nonprofit college or a private for-profit college for that matter. And in California, especially, there are a lot of really great public colleges. And you have UCLA, UCSD, UC Berkeley, you have the CSUs. They're all great options and much less expensive. And couple that with a Cal Grant, it makes it much more affordable. Now, some people decide that they must go to that really, really expensive college. Well, if you choose that, you're going to have to pay for it. And if you don't have
Mm.
pocket change that can cover the college costs, then you're probably going to have to borrow. I know people don't like borrowing, but it is an option to help you pay for that cost if you're choosing the more expensive colleges.
Yeah. Louise says guys often sleep on post graduation financial assistance. I got $45,000 of USC debit debt forgiven by working in public mental health. So I guess in this instance, what you choose to do after you graduate can actually help you pay for the college degree that you got. Is that
Yes,
correct?
there's something called public service loan forgiveness, where you repay your student loans in an income driven repayment plan, like the brand new SAVE plan. And after 10 years, that's 120 payments. If you're working in a full time in a public service job while repaying your loans, the remaining debt is forgiven. And that can lead to significant amounts of forgiveness, especially if you had to get a graduate degree to work in that field, like a master of social work. I mean, social workers don't get paid very well, but I mean, the additional debt doesn't matter as much if they are in in income driven repayment plans and they're pursuing a public service job.
Do you get or can you get grants for online classes, or is online education kind of not included under this umbrella?
No, online education, if it's accredited and the college has signed a program participation agreement with the U.S. Department of Education, then it's eligible for federal student aid the same as a brick and mortar institution. You need to check whether that college has what's called a federal school code, which allows you to complete the FAFSA and list that college there. And then you'll be able to pursue an online education. Like the SNHU is a New Hampshire university that has 100,000 online students.
Wow.
Uh, so it is possible, but you need to be aware of two things. Make sure it's an accredited institution, particularly in the program that you're pursuing. So it's not just the college, but also the program. And also think about whether you have the ability to complete that education, because you will be online, not with day to day interaction with other students. And so it takes a certain personality to be
Yeah.
successful in an online environment. There have been some studies that suggest that the people who are most likely to succeed in an online environment are people who already have a bachelor's degree.
Right.
Mm,
They already know like how to kind of sit through those classes and all that takes. Another suggestion I'd love your take on Teach for America, AmeriCorps. Do they help you pay for a traditional college education or how does that work?
Well, and if you volunteer with AmeriCorps, you can earn um, the equivalent of the maximum Pell Grant as an education award for each year of service in AmeriCorps. And that's a maximum. And then you can use that education award to help pay for college. So, and it's right now the maximum Pell Grant is $7,395. So that's not $70,000, but it's money that you don't have to borrow and therefore don't have to repay.
That's awesome. Okay, Mark. I mean, I really appreciate all the time. If
yeah.
you can give parents, though, as a parting note,
Mm.
one piece of advice as they start this process of either applying for scholarships, applying for grants, applying for financial aid, what's the biggest tip or the biggest mistake you want them to avoid making?
Well, a couple on the FAFSA don't report retirement plans like 401ks and IRAs or the net worth of the family home as an asset.
Hmm.
Those can be big assets, but they're not
Mhm.
reportable assets. So if you include them as an investment, even they are investments, but if you report them as that, it's going to significantly reduce your aid eligibility. So that's a most common mistake people make. Appeal if you have anything unusual in your family's financial circumstances. Too few people actually do appeal. And it's cheaper to save than to borrow. So start saving before the child goes to college, like you did. 529 plan is a great way of doing it. I started saving for my children's college education before they were born
Oh,
because every dollar you save is a dollar less you're going to have to borrow, and um, and you can earn a significant amount of return on that investment, which helps reduce the college costs. So if you start saving from birth, about a third of your savings goal will come from the earnings as opposed to your contributions. And it's never too late to start saving for college. Even a year before the child's going to enroll in college, everything that you save is going to be money that you don't have to borrow.
yeah. That is the best advice.
I have one last question
Mhm.
for this one's for Nikki and myself who have high school freshmen. Is there anything that we should be doing in the next 3 years
Yeah.
that can set the stage for a more successful college launch or financial aid when we have to fill out FAFSA? And that
Well,
kind of makes me think of what you talked about as far as, putting maybe your 529 in someone else's name type of thing.
right. So first of all, have your children search for scholarships because there are scholarships that are available to children in younger grades, not just high school seniors.
Mm.
There are some even available to elementary school students.
Wow.
Wow.
Um, the um, the FAFSA is based on 2-year-old income information, which that prior year starts January 1st of the sophomore year in high school. So starting with that sophomore year in high school, you don't want to artificially increase your income, like realizing capital gains by selling stocks or other investments,
Mhm.
Okay.
because that's going to count as income and that's going to reduce your aid eligibility. Also, if you're going to get a bonus, maybe you can have it deferred until a later year. You still get the money, it's just don't have it occur until after the January 1st of the sophomore year in college, when
Mhm.
it will no longer affect aid eligibility, assuming your child graduates in 4 years. They are going to graduate in 5 years, then you need to wait an additional year. Um, and there are a lot of things that and advice on how to reduce the impact of your finances on financial aid eligibility. There are going to be fewer of them now with the FAFSA simplification. Like one of the most common tips was to have your children go to college at the same time, so skipping the grades or having twins or triplets. Well, they're no longer dividing the parent contribution by the number of children in college, so that's no longer going to have a big impact on aid eligibility. But there
Mm.
are scholarships for twins. There are even a few colleges that have a kind of BOGO, buy one, get one free, where
Wow.
if both of the twins go, then one gets a scholarship one year and the other gets a scholarship next year.
Wow. I don't know if I would want to. Twins seem like a lot of work. I don't know if I'm going to make that investment really early on in my life for that kind of payoff, but I appreciate the thought. And so in 1 year, Kim, because our daughters are freshmen now. So
Yep.
1 year from right now is when we
Mhm.
really need to start watching our finances and not
Yep.
artificially add to it. Mark Kantrowitz, I'm keeping you on my speed dial because I now know that you're the guy to go to, but I really appreciate your time. And again,
Yeah, thank
if you
you.
want to read some of his books, How to Appeal for More College Financial Aid,
Mhm.
and the book, Who Graduates from College, Who Doesn't. Mark Kantrowitz, I really appreciate you coming on. Please send me those websites that can help people, and we'll talk again soon. I really appreciate all your knowledge today.
Thank you.
Thank you.